Good morning and welcome to Finance Mandarin China Insights. Today we have Dr. Yan and Vian Li, and we're looking at China leadership in business, how to adapt and succeed in China. So welcome Dr. Yan and Vian.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Let me introduce each of you first. Vian is the CEO of Finance Mandarin. She's the founder of 3 educational institutions with over 20 years experience teaching senior executives from the finance and debt capital market sectors. She has a CFA foundation, leading finance from Harvard Business School, PPP from Peking University, and an MA in education from UWA. Her clients are global business leaders, both inbound and outbound investments in China. Currently, Vian is raising capital funds for $20 million for the next venture. Welcome, Vian.
Thank you, John. It's nice to be here.
Dr. Wei Yan is the adjunct professor of finance at Pepperdine University. Previously, he is the MD for Moody's and Lehman Brothers, based in Hong Kong here, and the group treasurer for Citi Pacific. Dr. Yan has recently published a book, From the Great Wall to Wall Street, a cross-cultural look at leadership and management in China and the US. Welcome, Dr. Yan.
Thank you, John. Glad to be here.
Let's start with something basic but essential. Everybody knows that China is different, but how is it different? Dr. Yan.
Well, John, that is a very good question, because a lot of Westerners, they know China is different than their own country, but they don't know why and where to find the difference. If you look at it this way, the Chinese culture probably has about 5,000 years of history. And the Western culture, if you start from the early Greeks, about 3,000-4,000 years ago. So these were geographically very isolated entities. One developed in China as an agricultural culture, people. And whether in Greece you have merchants, you have sailors. So along with that, you have a culture that's very distinct and distinguished from each other. The Chinese culture is very agrarian based, where people in generation lives on the same land, and they depend on the heaven for the sun and the rain. They depend on the earth to nourish the plants and farm crops, and they depend on each other to help survive any difficulties. So their culture developed from this understanding: there's heaven, there's earth, there's man. These 3 have to live in harmony. And Western culture is different. Western culture, because of Greece emphasis on analysis, and so they look at things independent of themselves. They can look at things objectively. This is the universe, and we're looking at it with our eyes. We analyze it with mathematics. We describe the heavenly bodies, with how people work. And what is most important and very dangerous for the current world is the logic. Logic was put together by Aristotle. He was a student of Socrates. And logic there, he summarizes all the mathematical relationship into maybe a couple dozen what they call syllogisms. And therefore, the idea that if A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C is very common. Now, we can do the mathematics on things that are quantifiable, but there are things that cannot be put to describe as A or B or C in social settings, in economic settings, and relation settings.
It's not so analytical.
It's not so clear. So therefore, this is where Westerners sometimes have problems understanding Chinese culture. So this kind of logic sometimes get the Westerner some troubles in terms of understanding Chinese.
You mean right from the beginnings of the 2 different societies, the philosophical underlying principles are different from the beginning?
Absolutely.
So in the Western side, it's logical and analytical, but the Chinese philosophical basis is completely different. So what are the Chinese philosophical beginnings?
I think one of the earliest works on China, that kind of thing, is I Ching. I Ching is a mystical text that probably first surfaced around 3,500 years ago. So what does I Ching meant? That the man is part of the universe. We have to live according to the rules of the universe. first. So you cannot go to extremes, because when you do extremes, something's going to happen. When you have extreme humidity, you're going to have rain and thunderstorm. If you have extreme distress between people, you're going to have wars. So if you use that to look at the current world affairs and see for the trade war, what's going to happen is that both sides are going to lose. China and US are going to lose the trade war together. Okay, China is slowing down substantially. The US is slowing down as well. Both sides, the stock market is doing terribly. And US last night lost 2-3% in the Dow Jones. So what US thought is very much a Western way of thinking, is that I can come out with force, I can win this trade battle. Didn't happen. The Chinese know that we can drag this process long enough, then you're going to get hurt as much as I do. Then let's sit down and talk. I think this is what's going to happen towards the end of this month, when President Xi is going to meet with Donald Trump in Argentina on the G20 meeting. So that's just to explain to you the way the Chinese think. It's not always confrontational.
And I guess your point is the roots are very deep. Western roots, thousands of years ago, based on Western analytical philosophy, and the Chinese roots are also very deep, thousands of years ago. It's important to understand where this has come from.
Yeah, there is a tendency to dismiss all the old stuff, to think that, look, we don't live like that. But that's not true. The modern Western way of living is very much based on Greece. The concept of freedom, individuals, and democracy, analytical, and this is all Socratic analysis. This is all based on the Greeks. The Chinese also the same thing. You talk about, if you look at the Chinese leaders, they talk about harmony. They talk about how to work together. These
collective group.
These are all ancient wisdoms.
Bien, any comment, or what's your comment on Dr. Yan?
To be successfully doing business in China, you need to understand the way of Chinese thinking. Dr. Yan, you're absolutely right. Western people need to change and adapt the way of thinking when they're doing business in China. There are many ways in handle the differences in doing business in China. Let me mention about the two ways that don't work in China. Okay, the first way is a naive way. Catch the Mandarin speaking cleaning lady to translate the medical diagnosis. Really, some people did take this approach. The second way that doesn't work is to keep maintaining this kind of barrier by using an interpreters or by using a translation software only. If you're only using your internal bilingual staff, you will completely miss the person-to-person relationship. As a CEO of your finance institutions, you need to use Chinese Mandarin to directly to express your ideas, not with your translator or your subordinates.
Okay, so Vien, that's the first two methods here that don't work, the naive approach and keep the barrier approach. Okay, can you explain to us some methods that do work?
Yes, in Finance Mandarin, we have a secret sauce to help CEOs and senior executives to overcome those barriers. Let me share with you. There are 4 strategies, 4个策略, which we can help CEO to adapt the way of doing business in China. The first strategy, 第一个策略, is to learn Mandarin Chinese. To learn Mandarin Chinese, this is the how to do in Chinese. It's a good idea to learn Mandarin Chinese by yourself to bridge the barriers. At least you can introduce yourself and open the door. The key is to find the right learning mode, the learning platform, and the right trainer. The second strategy, 第二个策略, is to say something intelligent. It's good to have something intelligent to say about financial market and the regulations. For example, debt equity swap, 债转股, supply side structural reform, 供给侧结构性改革, and one belt one road, 一带一路. The third strategy, 第三个策略, is to understand who is who. You need to understand who is the Chinese leaders, government official, regulators, and who are the Chinese business leaders. Even at the beginning, it's worth to know the proper names of the Chinese leaders, such as President Xi Jinping, Wang Qishan, and other Chinese leaders like Ma Yun, Ma Huateng, etc. Over the year, you will slowly build up your understanding and connection in China. The fourth strategy, 第四个策略, is to study Chinese way of thinking. This is exactly in line with your theory, your line, Dr. Yan, the way of adapt to understand Chinese thinking in a historical to the current situations. The successful business leaders in the Western world do study the Chinese way of thinking. One of my clients studied the whole speech of Xi Jinping's speech about the 19th Party's Congress Working Report, which have 32,000 words. Why? Because he wanted to deeply understand the Chinese way of thinking and the first-hand information from Chinese, not from the translator.
Can you summarize for us again the 4 strategies?
To sum it up, there are 4 strategies to adapt into China. 4个策略.
Okay.
So the first one is to learn Mandarin skill, Mandarin language. That is how. Secondly, is to say something intelligent in Chinese, which is what you're going to learn. And then number 3, you have to know who is who in China. This is about who. This is the most important, if not the least important. And then the last one, number 4, is to study the Chinese thinking. This is the ultimate target, why you have to learn. This is the soft why.
Dr. Yen, in your experience, those who do aspire to understand the Chinese way of thinking, do they have more success?
I think they do. You know, there's a much more easy communication for them with the Chinese leaders, that they kind of raise themselves to a higher platform. And rather than just going to pleasantries, the Chinese think that, oh, hey, he speaks my language, I can trust him. So there's initial comfort that way. It's good to know something that when you speak with a Chinese leader and you hit the right spot, they know exactly where you're from. Maybe you did some, they know you've done some homework. They're grateful for that. So I think that is very important. Most of the senior bankers that are successful in China, they go there all the time, Hank Paulson and those people, they do understand the China quite well.
And the Chinese way of thinking?
Yes.
Thank you both very much, Vienne and Dr. Yan, for your time today and sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.